Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Forum, Technology and Governance in an Innovative City. I am Poon Keng Wang. I'm a director at the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities, as well as the Singapore University of Technology and Design. It is my privilege to be your MC for today's forum and for such a diverse and eclectic crowd. The Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities was formally established in September 2012. It is a major centre in the Singapore University of Technology and Design, and I think as many of you would know, the universities was set up in collaboration with MIT of USA and Zhejiang University in Hangzhou, China. We are very pleased today to be collaborating and partnering the Centre for Liveable Cities for this forum today. We are also very thankful and grateful to the Far East Organization for the generous support towards this forum. We have a very interesting program today, and we have a very full program today. So let me start quickly by inviting Ambassador Heng Chee, Chairman of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities, to give us her welcome remarks. Professor Chan, please.
Good morning. Distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities and the Centre for Liveable Cities, I thank you for your strong support for this forum. I am Heng Chee, Chairman of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Cities. We are delighted to work with the Centre for Liveable Cities. Yes, we are two different entities. We all use the same blue for our logo color. At the close of this forum, you will hear from Mr. Koo Ting Chai, the CEO of the Centre for Liveable Cities. I would like to begin by thanking the Far East Organization and Mr. Flip Ng for their extraordinary generosity in supporting this event. Now, we are privileged today to have 4 distinguished and renowned thought leaders to discuss a very relevant and current topic, technology and governance in the innovative city. The LKY-CIC is shorter, just held its inaugural International Advisory Panel meeting yesterday, and all 4 speakers are members of the International Advisory Panel. We have 6 panels on the IAP, 3 international and 3 from Singapore. They will converse with us and provide ideas and advice on how to position the LKY-CIC and to keep us connected to reality, to global ideas and technological innovation with smart public policy. Our speakers need no introduction, but I should give them one. I will introduce them in their speaking order. First, Mr. Narayana Murthy is the founder and now Chairman Emeritus of Infosys, an Indian multinational provider of business consulting, technology, engineering, and outsourcing services. In fact, I should say, Mr. Murthy articulated, designed, and implemented the global delivery model, which has become the foundation of the huge success in IT services outsourcing from India. He is one of the most successful entrepreneurs in India and in the world today. He has a second life as a venture capitalist, and he spends time promoting education. I watched some of his YouTube interviews, and I would add, Mr. Murthy is a great humanist. Now, behind every successful man, there is a smart woman. And the smart woman is Mrs. Sudha Murthy. She was the first investor in his company with 10,000 rupees, which is about $250 US. She's smart. The second speaker is Mr. Peter Ho, Chairman of the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Singapore, an advisor to the Centre for Strategic Futures. Mr. Ho is a model of the thoughtful bureaucrat, practical but works with ideas and always exploring new ideas. He was Permanent Secretary of Defense, Permanent Secretary of Foreign Affairs, and Head of the Civil Service before he stepped down. Peter looks for black swans and is a much sought after person by the foresight groups in the United States and in Europe. Our third speaker for this morning is Professor Edward Glaeser, one of the leading economists, urban economists, and a recognized authority on the subject of cities today. He is the Fred and Eleanor Glimp Professor of Economics at Harvard. In fact, he became professor at 25, I'm told. And he's also director of the Taubman Centre for State and Local Government and the Rappaport Institute for Greater Boston. He recently published a well-received book, Triumph of the City, which seeks to understand why cities are important and the centers of creativity. Professor Glaeser writes lyrical prose and is not difficult to understand at all as an economist. He is in great demand internationally and in the United States, and we are very lucky to be able to have him join our IAP and to come to Singapore. Finally, we have Professor Wang, the Dean of Architecture School in the China Academy of Art, Hangzhou, and the 2012 Pritzker Prize winner, the Nobel of Architecture. Professor Wang was also named the Architecture Innovator of 2012 by the Wall Street Journal magazine. He is also described as the most revered architect in China today by the Financial Times. Before the Pritzker, Professor Wang was winning other prizes, including in 2012, the Gold Medal of Architecture from l'Académie d'Architecture of France, and in 2010, with Lee Kuan Yew, another smart woman behind a successful man, the Schelling Architecture Prize from Germany, which goes to individuals who have responsibly advanced architecture's development with significant designs or realized designs with profound contributions to architecture history and theory. The topic before us is technology and governance in the innovative city. There are three key words: technology, governance, and innovative. Each of our speakers will bring a different perspective to the topic, and that is the purpose: to broaden our ways of thinking on this matter. The creativity and the growth in technologies is astounding. It is digital technology, but goes beyond digital technology. Eric Schmidt and Gerard Cohen from Google just published a book, The New Digital Age, Reshaping the Future of People, Nations, and Business. They raised some serious issues of technology for governance. I am sure this will be touched upon by some of the speakers. Technology is enabling, but technology can also threaten our identities and erode privacy. And what of cyber threats? And how do architects use technology to design for social capital? We look forward to a discussion of some of these questions and others. And it is my great pleasure to call on the speakers for their presentations. They will be given each 15 minutes for their presentation. I think I have a bell there, and I will ring it like 2 minutes before their time is up. So let me call upon the first speaker, Mr. Narayana Murthy, to take the floor. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't need that. I don't need that.
Yeah, sorry, I just
Okay.
have to get this off.
Okay. Wonderful.
Sorry.
No problem. Thanks. First of all, I must confess that I have neither the expertise nor the eloquence of the other panelists to whom I have been listening with tremendous interest yesterday. I'm very grateful to Professor Chan for this kindness to share the platform with such three wonderful celebrities in their own field is indeed a great privilege. Today I will speak about three issues: urbanization as it exists and the challenges that we have. Second, where we are in the digital revolution as far as its applicability to city planning and operations are concerned. And finally, the impact of this digital revolution on both the urban dwellers and their governments. First, the current realities. From time immemorial, cities have been the hub for commerce, science, arts, prosperity, productivity, innovation, and development. These characteristics are more pronounced in today's environment. Roughly half of humanity, that is close to 3.4 billion people, live in cities today. Around 828 million people live in slums amongst these city dwellers, and this number is rising. As the economist Michael Leaf writes, and I quote him, and he says, "Islands of homogeneity and wealth, which are cities, are set in a sea of diversity and poverty," unquote. Studies show that today, world cities occupy just 2% of the Earth's land, but account for 60% to 80% of energy consumption and 75% of carbon emissions. In 2011, 359 million people lived in megacities. That's equivalent to 9.9% of the urban population of the world. By 2025, some 630 million people will live in these megacities, or 13.6% of the then world's urban population. According to the United Nations, the developing world will have more urban than rural dwellers by 2030. By 2050, world's urban population will almost double from its 2007 size of 3.3 billion people to about 6.5 billion people. Cities become poles of attraction for capital and labor. Businesses and individuals locate in urban areas to take advantage of the higher total factor productivity. Thus, savings and wealth become concentrated in cities. According to a McKinsey study, by 2015, the 600 biggest cities in the world will account for as much as 60% of the global GDP. Professor Ed Glaeser, who is here, writes in his book, The Triumph of the City, how does this greatest invention of ours has made us richer, smarter, healthier, happier, all of that. I don't know if he said happier, but I did that. And I quote him. He says, cities don't make people poor. They attract poor people, and they attract poor people by delivering a path out of poverty and to prosperity, a chance to partner with people who have different skills, access to world markets, access to capital that enables poor people, some of them, but not all of them, to actually find a way forward, unquote. Now let me come to current challenges. But to be able to grow, cities are faced with multiple challenges. One, there is too little land and too many inhabitants. Second, inadequacy of infrastructure, which has not kept pace with demand. Third, high resource intensity and therefore unsustainable consumption. Fourth, high waste and carbon emissions from increased density. Fifth, civic services and governance under tremendous pressure. Low on citizen well-being, unequal economic prosperity, constraints to doing business and economic growth. If these issues are not resolved and carefully planned for the future, it can lead to serious productivity loss in their growth centers. For example, in its first survey in Toronto in 2009, OECD estimated a loss of Canadian dollars 3.3 billion in productivity loss due to traffic congestion on the streets. Australia has identified that insufficient number of houses in the cities is causing loss of nation's productivity as more and more workers spend time commuting from their suburbs. Citing this, the Australia's infrastructure minister has called for large-scale urban renewal in suburbs close to the city centers and in transport hubs, and has urged urban planners to narrow the distance between where people live and where people work. Now let me come to where we are on the digital revolution in urban planning and governance. Thanks to increasing wireless bandwidth and computing power, miniaturization, reduced cost of computing and communication technologies, we are moving towards ubiquitous or pervasive computing or computing on the go. This will bring, obviously, higher level of interaction between the government and the citizens and much greater demand on the city governments. Tools in participatory planning like social networking and crowdsourcing will allow easier participation of various communities in the planning and operation of cities. They will bring the working of democracy in real time to people through projects like They Work For You by Matthew Somerville of UK. There will be a greater pressure on governments to respond quickly and with the required data. This will give better voice to the poorer sections of the society. Big data analytics will help governments leverage the power of urban infrastructure and urban informatics to understand the requirements of the citizens on issues like traffic, healthcare, lifestyle, entertainment, education, and livelihood, and help solve these problems. The success of Waikiki and the power of Future Melbourne, the first attempt at a city plan that anybody can edit, will enhance the participation of citizens in city planning. People like Colab Radio from MIT will help excluded communities contribute to civic engagement. Work on embedded systems, sensors, and mobile devices leveraging the power of internet will usher in smart, connected, real-time cities with real-time optimization of smart grids, traffic, water management, clean air, and sustainability management, and better response to citizens' requests for city services. Information technology will enhance move towards paperless transactions and make world and therefore cities a more sustainable place. Projects like Perry, which reduce energy using e-ink like Kindle does, will become popular. Efforts like Code for America that pairs programmers with city administrators will accelerate use of technologies for better cities. Policy simulation, scenario planning, spatial analysis systems, participatory planning technologies, and decision support systems, which are now being used by advanced cities, will become more common. Such tools will help city governments avoid huge mistakes in decision making and achieve better sustainability, fairness, speed, and efficiency in projects. Now, as a software person, let me talk a little bit about the characteristics of the various software systems that will come into play in city management. First, I think there will be a greater focus on accessibility to systems, because you have people from multiple cultures, you have old people, you have people who are blind, people who can't hear, etc. Therefore, the new systems will satisfy the needs of all these people. Second, I think these systems will be either SaaS, that is software as a service, or systems or apps that are available today on the various technologies like Windows, etc. Then they have to be highly performant, because the demand on these systems will be so huge that performance will become an extremely important criterion. Next, I think because these systems are being used by such large number of people, the quality of these systems will have to be very good, because if they fail, and if a couple of systems fail, then the city administration will get a bad name, and therefore the quality of what we offer to the citizens will have to be very, very good. Next, I think security will become extremely important, because there will be attempts at cyber terrorists to bring down the city's systems. At the same time, there will be much greater focus on data privacy. These systems will have to become necessarily mobile friendly, because as we move forward, there will be greater and greater usage of mobile computing by users, and mobile instruments will be the basic instruments for them. And then 3D printing will become more and more popular, because as it is, I have seen lots of architects who come to my company to make presentations use 3D printing for developing their models. Now, let me then go to the next issue, in the sense, what do these new technologies, new paradigms pose for governance in terms of both the urban dwellers and the cities? One, I think technology is a great leveler. Therefore, the power will shift from the rich, the powerful, and the elite, which it is today, to the poor and the middle class, who are in majority. Therefore, the rulers of cities will have to change their mindset. Second, technology will bring in better transparency and therefore better accountability. Change is not easy, since people like status quo. Many projects have been abandoned after hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent, since these projects were likely to diminish the power of the ruling elite. Because of all this wonderful progress that we are making, citizens will become even more demanding in speed, in transparency, in quality of response, and governments will have to be prepared to satisfy such demands. However, while all these technologies will do good, certainly they will improve the city governance. The politicians in emerging countries have a big problem, and that is their electoral strength is in rural areas and the economic strength is in urban areas. Therefore, they are in a dilemma which whether to openly support all the wonderful projects that the cities want and lose elections, which has happened in India in several cases. So this is a big dilemma, and we have to discuss how these politicians need to manage this tough thing. Well, I'm glad I've finished a minute and 25 seconds before. Thank you. Bye.
How do you do this?
This is the down button.
Okay, this is what?
If you, yes, switch it on. You can use the right and left.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to talk about this morning CSI Singapore. I'm not talking about a new television program. I'm talking about Singapore, the city, the state, and the island. Now, Singapore, many have called it the accidental nation, improbable nation, but independence, when it came, was unwanted, it was unforeseen. That happened in August 1965. And with independence, with separation, we lost our economic hinterland, no natural resources, high unemployment, and there were big issues of economic survival and national security. A couple of years later, the British said they're going to pull out from east of the Suez. 15% of jobs would be wiped off. That's a challenge on independence. So in 65, Singapore became a city-state. There's a need to provide space for growing its economy. There's a port, the airport, industrial land. So also, as a city-state, you have to worry about defense. So we have to provide training areas, military camps, air bases, naval bases. These are all demands of a city-state. Not just a city, but a city-state. And then we are an island. And we are a small island. 1.5 million people in 1965 crammed into a small space. I think it was about 660 square kilometers. Also a geographically disadvantaged state. We're like a landlocked country, like Laos, like Austria, like Switzerland. Why? We are geographically disadvantaged because we have no direct access to international waters. We have to go through the territorial waters of other countries. So there are real physical limits to growth for small city-state island like Singapore. Now, urban development, what's it all about? It's about finding on a small island, meeting big needs of a city and the needs of a state. You have to provide for commerce, you have to provide for housing, you have to provide for industry, but you have also to worry about things like nature and greenery. You have to also worry about things like water, where are you going to catch the water, where are you going to store the water. So the challenges of a city-state on a small island are many. How to carve out from this very small land area housing, industry, defense, commerce, retail. Also need to worry about the softer aspects, green and congenial living environment, the social amenities, and also room for growth. Population is not going to stop. We were worried about population growing too fast, so we said stop at 2. We didn't stop until we dropped till about, I think 1.2, I think we are now about 1.20 TFR. But you still grow in spite of that. So what's the foundation for dealing with these problems? I put it to you that the foundation is good governance. It's the foundation for our survival, it's the foundation for our security, it's the foundation for success. It's the basis for making this small city-state island livable and sustainable. It's also needed for adaptability. Things change. The world we live in changes. And there's also what we need for innovation. Now, first let me say that I don't think bad governance is going to stop innovation, but that innovation will be sporadic and it won't be sustainable. Good governance and innovative urban development go in tandem. Now I want to talk a bit about technology, and maybe I'll be a bit provocative here. Technology is not the driver of innovation. It is the servant of vision, and it supports innovation, which is in turn the product of good governance. Now think about Moore's Law. Moore's Law says the rate of technological change is accelerating. And if we think about it, the pursuit of technological solutions without a proper framework for long-term planning and without the capacity to grow and adapt can lock cities into rigid pathways, because technological changes can change rapidly. When things change, you're locked into it, how are you going to adapt? It's a big challenge. And so you have to bear in mind that when we develop cities around technology, we must have that capacity to change and the capacity to adapt. What happened with, let's look at the case of the automobile. Cities designed for the horse now have to cater for the automobile. What's going to happen in future for cities when the cars go away, the way of the horse-drawn carriage? Will cities be able to cope with a new kind of technology? I don't know, but that's a question which planners have to address. So there's a need to build a capacity to change, which is a product of good governance. Now, necessity, of course, spawns innovation. And Singapore, at independence, was in great need of a lot of things. One of the problems was, how do we grow the space? Small island. So, obviously, you grow space horizontally, but you also grow it vertically. Then land reclamation, and we adopted all kinds of technologies. In fact, we pioneered the use of a lot of technologies, the vertical drain system for soil consolidation. I think NUS was the pioneer in this. Dynamic compaction, vibro flotation, sand pile techniques. And in the Ministry of Defense, underground ammunition storage. We moved our ammunition underground, released a lot of land for other uses, and it's pioneering work. The shock codes which we developed were adopted by NATO. And then that eventually gave us confidence to go into this underground oil storage caverns of Jurong. So I think we have to psychologically prepare ourselves for transformational change every now and then. Not incremental change, but transformational change. It is the willingness to make fundamental changes, setting aside tried and tested approaches, accepting the risk of trying something new that may have no precedent. You need a bold vision. Jurong Island was built from swampland. When you looked at it before it became the industrial estate it is today, it was just swampland, mangrove swamps. You know, you step into it, maybe a lot of nice nature, a lot of birds and wildlife, but how are you going to build an industry? You have to reclaim it. And what do? They shave off hills, fill the land. Jurong Island from 7 small islands. That's also a bold vision. And today, Marina Bay for the new financial district and the iconic Singapore skyline. That's also the result of a bold vision. You never get to have these things if you do not have the bold vision and the courage to follow that vision. Housing the nation, rehousing people from crowded city center, squatter colonies. It was about giving people not just a place to stay, but also encouraging home ownership. That was part of nation building. High-rise public housing in satellite towns. Today's 23 high-rise self-sufficient towns house about 3.1 million people. But there must be an emotional connection. Emotional connection to place is part of the human condition. It's what gives cities their souls. In our early rush to build a financial district, clear squatters, grow public housing, resulted in irreplaceable loss of heritage. Well, we learned from our mistakes. Today, heritage is a core policy consideration, not just for the preservation of the architectural heritage, but the history, cultural, and environmental heritage. But of course, there will be trade-offs, given the constraints of a small city. And we were green before green became politically correct. Now we have gardens by the bay, we have green buildings following green mark standards, ABC, active, beautiful, clean waterways, park connectors, the Clean Air Act, and we have moved pollutive industries away from the population centers. But remember, in such a complex, uncertain environment, we'll have to make big decisions under conditions of incomplete information and uncertain outcomes. Experimentation is often more valuable in this kind of environment than predictions of analytical models. And this requires an ability to experiment. And we have had big experiments. The new water desalination, the deep tunnel sewerage system, common services tunnel, district cooling, CFD, computational fluid dynamics for creating microclimatic conditions. We are dealing with wicked problems in cities today. This is a term coined by Horst Rittel. What are wicked problems? They are highly complex, there are multiple stakeholders with different perspectives, different objectives, and no immediate and obvious solutions. Urban development is a wicked problem. Everybody has a different view of which direction the city should develop. And you look today, 1967, Singapore looks crowded, but today it looks much more crowded than it was in 1967. How do you deal with wicked problems? There must be a whole of government approach. Dealing with wicked problems, dealing with the multiple stakeholders, get a better understanding of the larger organizational and national needs. So the whole of government approach, judicious land use planning and the long-term view has given us, I think today, a relatively good quality environment in spite of high density. But there are obstacles to whole of government. My turf. The role of government is changing. Today people expect to be consulted. So it's no longer government to you, government for you, but government with you, co-creation, working together with the people and private sectors. And from governed by agency to whole of government, we're now talking a whole of city, whole of nation, engaging the people and private sectors. So in summary, I think the factors of good governance in an innovative city must be strong leadership, whether at the municipal level, the state level, federal level. There must be effective institutions, the civil service must be there, you must have the legal infrastructure, your policies must be pragmatic, there must be good planning, but good planning with a long-term view rather than just a focus on short-term returns. Put people before function and put function before form. There must be experimentation and risk management, and then we should think of whole of government, whole of city, whole of nation. Thank you.
I am humbled to be on this stage with these remarkable people, and I am honored to have the chance to talk to you for the next 15 minutes. The problems of the 21st century are overwhelmingly the problems of the great cities of the developing world. No city is better run than Singapore. No city has a greater role to potentially play in turning the poorer cities of the world from hells into places that are far more comfortable. And that's why I'm so delighted to be part of the Lee Kuan Yew Centre, to try and use the skills, the knowledge, the innovation that has come out of Singapore to try and make for better cities throughout the world. Now I want to start in a city far from this glittering capital of the information age. I want to start in the New York City of my own youth. And these are two iconic images of that age. The bottom line shows Gerald Ford's refusal to bail out the city. He was actually right not to bail out the city, but it was a time in which New York had been shedding hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs. The largest industrial cluster in the US in the 1950s was not automobile production in Detroit, it was garment production in New York City, and the garment sector was hammered by the globalization, by the decline in transportation costs that made world trade in garments easy. along with the decline in industry, was a rise in social unrest, was an increasingly expensive city that was unable to be funded. That was the background for the need for the bailout. Ford didn't give the city its bailout, and indeed, when Jimmy Carter walked through the South Bronx, and that's the other image you can see, it looked as if the city's buildings, once proud symbols of an urban civilization, were about to be taken over by the weeds, were about to be reclaimed by nature, that we were headed back to that world suggested in the last scene of Planet of the Apes, where the Statue of Liberty would come poking out of the sand, suggesting an urban age whose time had come and gone. For indeed, in those years, it looked as if technology was going to doom the city. It looked as if the industrial city had come and gone, and even through the 1980s and early 1990s, it looked like new information technology was going to make face-to-face contact, and the cities that enabled that contact obsolete. The cyberseers, the techno-prophets of the 1990s claimed that once we could all communicate electronically, what use would we have to be in the same room? And with that, we would all move to electronic cottages and just dial it in. But that isn't what happened. The picture that I'm showing you here is an image of the United States. Mic working? No. Is an image of the United States. And what I've done is I've ranked America's 3,000 odd counties on the basis of their density level. Because at their heart, cities are the absence of physical space between people and firms. Cities are density, proximity, closeness. And what you can see in the bottom graph, bottom line, is the relationship between density as of the year 2000 and subsequent population growth. The places that started with the least land per capita, that were the most like Singapore, experienced the fastest population growth, whereas the spaces that were empty, nobody came to them. So whereas at the start of the 19th century, Americans left their dense enclaves on the eastern seaboard to populate the empty hinterland of the country, at the start of the 21st century, instead of spreading out, people are clustering in. They're clustering in for many reasons, but perhaps the most important of them is the hypercharged economic productivity in our dense metropolitan areas. And that's what's shown by the top graph, which shows the relationship between median household income and density across America. The densest tenth of America's counties have earnings that are on average 50% higher than the least dense half. The three largest metropolitan areas in the United States, New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, produce almost 1/5, 18% of America's GDP, while including only 13% of America's population. As was already mentioned, in 2007, we recently passed the halfway point, where more than 50% of humanity lives in cities. And it's hard not to think that that's on net a good thing, because those people who, on average, the incomes per capita in the more dense countries are 5 times higher than the incomes per capita in the least dense countries, and infant mortality levels are less than 1/3. Why did cities come back? Why didn't information technology make cities obsolete? Well, I think this picture, and I should disclose at this point in time that I write a column for Bloomberg View every other week, but this picture, I think, suggests it. This is a picture of the bullpen at City Hall, a wall-less office where good government happens. It's modeled on the bullpen, the wall-less office, LLP, which is modeled on the Solomon Brothers trading floor, which Michael Bloomberg ran before he went on his own to become an entrepreneur. And I think there are 3 points here, I think, that are important. The first of which is it reminds us of the chain of innovation in finance that helped New York come back. At its height, 43% of the payroll on the island of Manhattan is in finance, and there's a good reason why cities like Singapore and Hong Kong and Tokyo and New York are financial capitals. Because the edge of cities in the modern age is to speed the flow of information across people, to speed knowledge. And there's no industry where a little bit of information can be turned into a fortune overnight more readily than finance. The second reason I like this image is it reminds us of the chain of innovation that happened in finance, an increasingly sophisticated approach to risk and return, and Bloomberg's technology is part of that. It came out of the city. Cities are both changed by technology and create technology themselves. Another point I think that's critical here is that Bloomberg is an IT billionaire, right? He in some sense is competing with the guys in Silicon Valley, but he's able to succeed so successfully because of the knowledge New York gives him. And that's fundamentally what cities do that is most important. They make us smart by enabling us to learn from other smart people. And the last thing I like about this is, in fact, this wall-less office. right? Because it is, in fact, the city writ small. There's something funny about trading floors. Here we have some of the wealthiest people on the planet who in a normal industry would sit protected by large offices, encased beyond oaken desks, protected by executive assistants. But in a trading floor, they're in the middle of the action, getting sweat, spit, guacamole on top of themselves. Why are they putting up with all this inconvenience? Because knowledge is more important than space. And that is fundamentally why cities came back, because globalization and new technologies have made knowledge, information, innovation more important than ever. That has fundamentally not hurt cities, that has played to cities' advantages. Because cities are the places where we learn most, where we come up with new ideas, right? Face-to-face contact is not becoming obsolete, as we know in universities, right? Because the more complicated the idea, the easier it is to get lost in translation. And we have evolved over millions of years to have these cues for communicating comprehension or confusion that are lost when we're not in the same room with one another. The hard part about teaching is not knowing your script, it's knowing whether or not anything you're saying is getting through. You lose the ability to learn that when you're not in the same room. Now, technologies are continuing to make cities better. This is an image of Zipcar, right, which enables us to share cars. This has become easier with GPS systems and other technological tools. This will continue to make cities more livable, just as the great technology of the 19th century, the skyscraper, made cities soar 100 years ago. Now, cities are, of course, not just about productivity. They're also about quality of life. And one of the things that's interesting is that if you look across the world, there's a strong connection between urbanization at the country level and how satisfied people are with their lives. People in rich countries don't typically say that they're happier if they live in cities, but people in poorer countries, like, for example, India, certainly do. Right? Cities can be hellish, but there's no future in rural poverty. The right answer is to figure out how to make cities like Mumbai, like Kinshasa, more livable. It's not to give up on cities and to think that there's some future elsewhere. Cities are also an environmental solution. Right? If the great growing economies of India and China see their per capita carbon emission levels rise to those seen in the sprawling United States, global carbon emissions go up by 130%. If they stop at the level of wealthy but hyperdense Hong Kong, global carbon emissions go up by less than 30%. Compact living, because of shorter commuting distances, because of smaller housing units, means less energy use. And this comes from a paper I wrote with Matthew Kahn, just showing within Boston, the places that look green are not. The places that look brown are. Look brown are green. Now, not all cities have managed to successfully reinvent themselves. And indeed, in the US, there has been no comeback for the industrial city. This is a picture of Detroit, burning in the late 1960s when social unrest seized the city. Detroit lost another 25% of its population during the last decade alone. Smokestacks are not the long-run future of cities. They're best put on islands, best put in rural hinterlands. This will be an issue for the developing world as well. China is currently riding high on an industrial surge, but many of the industrial cities of China will be facing problems that are not dissimilar to those of Detroit in the next 50 years. And indeed, the attempt to solve those problems, as the US did, with adding infrastructure, is fundamentally flawed. This is Detroit's people mover monorail, an exercise in stupidity. The people mover monorail glides, as you may have noticed, over essentially empty streets. It's easy to get around Detroit. It was a city built for 1.85 million people. That is less than half of it. The hallmark of declining cities is that they have an abundance of structures and infrastructure relative to the level of demand. They're not fixed with unnecessary building. And indeed, foolish infrastructure investments are right now going on even in the developing world where infrastructure is badly needed. Right? We need assiduous investment in cost-benefit analysis to make sure that we make smart investments, not things like the people mover monorail. Now, some cities, of course, have come back, and they've come back because of ideas and innovation. It's easy to forget now, but in 1971, Seattle looked no different from St. Louis. Buffalo looked no different from Boston. Two jokers put on a highway leaving Seattle in 1971 the sign asking the last person to leave the city to please turn out the lights. Because mighty Boeing had been cutting down on the number of jobs, and no one could imagine a Seattle with a smaller Boeing, just as no one could imagine a General Motors with a smaller, Detroit with a smaller General Motors. And yet Seattle did come back. It came back because of Amazon. It came back because of Costco, because of Starbucks, because of Microsoft, because of entrepreneurs who didn't have any business presence in the city. Now, what determines which cities were able to come back like Seattle rather than cities like Detroit? Above all, it's education. Skills are the fundamental bedrock on which urban and national success rests, and no country knows this better than Singapore does. This is the relationship between county-level population growth in the U.S. and how well educated the share of the population with a college degree as of 2000. Strong relationship there, as you can tell. On average, an individual's wages in the U.S. go up by about 8%, as the share of people in the metropolitan area with a college degree goes up by 10%, holding your years of schooling constant. It really pays to have smart neighbors, because they'll give you a job, because they'll give you an idea. Now, across countries, this is also the relationship between per capita GDP and scores. You'll notice Singapore is showing up quite highly on that, roughly as wealthy as its skills predict that it should be. Education is something where Singapore can help. I personally am a beneficiary of this, as my kids learn math from Singapore math books. But this is something that can be given throughout the world. Now, I am often amazed that the things that academics teach ever have any value in the real world whatsoever. I'm not sure anything I have to say ever does. But cities are still centers of skills, and the most important skills are those that are learned outside of the academy. They're those that are learned on the street. They're those that are picked up at water coolers and at cafes. And of all those informal skills, nothing is more important than the talent and the inclination to be an entrepreneur. 50 years ago, the economist Ben Chinitz was comparing New York and Pittsburgh and noting that New York appeared to be more resilient even then. He argued that this was the result of the garment industry, an industry with few returns to scale, where anyone with a good idea and a couple of sewing machines could get started. That created a legacy of entrepreneurship in New York that Pittsburgh, which had U.S. Steel, did not have. It is remarkable, given the mediocre proxies we have for entrepreneurship, like having a lot of little establishments versus a few big ones. It is remarkable, given how mediocre these proxies are, how powerful they are at predicting urban resurgence. This is the relationship between those places down there have a lot of little firms, these places have a few big firms, tons of employment growth, little employment growth, right? Very strong connection. In terms of government policy, you really want to worry about those barriers to entrepreneurship that make it difficult to start new firms, because a culture of entrepreneurship can get lost. Now, the most entrepreneurial place I've ever been is the Dharavi slum of Mumbai, a place of just remarkable human talent, human energy. But it also reminds us, right, because once you go outside these entrepreneurial little shops, you see a kid defecating in the streets, you see unpaved roads, you see all the failures of government that exist in many developing world cities, right? I mean, I often think of India as a place where the incredible human talent, the human entrepreneurship embodied above all by Narayana and Murthy, are coupled with a government that has failed to do justice to its people. Singapore can help here as well. There's no better run city on this planet than Singapore is. And when it comes to battling the demons of density, and there are demons, because if two people are close enough to give each other an idea face to face, they're also close enough to give each other a contagious disease. Battling those demons requires competent government, it requires technology, but not technology alone. You can't build your way out of traffic congestion, right? There's something called the fundamental law of highway congestion, which is that vehicle miles traveled increase roughly 1-for-1 with highway miles built. If you build it, they will drive, which is why electronic road pricing is the right answer, and is the right answer for China today, right now. Now, one problem, and this is a problem that many nations continue to face, is that the benefits of urbanization are not necessarily reaped evenly. This is rising inequality in America's cities. Mr. Murthy already mentioned my claim that the poverty of cities is not all bad, but it's not all good either. And in a place like Singapore, I think it's particularly poised to deal with this, because in the West, the middle class have just left our cities, and we're left with the rich and the poor. The middle class are still here, so figuring out better solutions for the middle class are critical. Both in the labor market, I think, where we have less to say, but also particularly in the housing market. The U.S., and I'll just end with this, the U.S. has done a great job at providing low-cost housing in sprawling Sunbelt cities, mass developments, but it has not done equivalently in high-cost, high-density areas, right? This is the great challenge ahead, is actually making comfortable, cheap, livable housing units, right? Doing it at a low cost, not through government subsidies, but through technology. And if I think about a future that is dense, that is productive because it's dense, that is environmentally sensitive because it's dense, that requires the ability to deliver large amounts of space, not at $300 a square foot, but at $80 or $90 a square foot going forward. And I think that is something else that Singapore, above all, and I can talk about this later, has the ability to contribute. Thank you.
很抱歉，这个因为我不会使用计算机，所以我要请教他一下。
I'm so sorry because I can't use computer very well, so I have to actually seek help.
非常荣幸啊，今天能够在这里，跟大家交流一下我的工作。
I'm very honored to be able to share some of my work experience with you here.
因为通过参与这个新加坡这个李光耀未来城市中心的一些工作，我也非常荣幸，好像和新加坡这座模范城市有了关系。
And through my involvement in Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative Centres, I'm really honored that I'm able to work in this model city.
当然也很唐突啊，因为新加坡是一个以非常专业的、非常好的设计管理著名的城市，但是我今天要在这里以一个业余建筑师的身份谈一下我的工作。
And I am sorry that we know Singapore is a very professional country, and we are reputed for our design and management. But here today, I'm going to share with you something about amateur architecture.
也许对新加坡来说，我们所做的会有一点点参照的作用。
Perhaps for Singapore, what we've done could be a reference for you.
其实谈到任何一个地方的发展，我觉得最重要的就是，要对自己生活的这个地方，它其实有一个，你的心里都有一个图像，比如说你对未来有一个愿景，就这个东西大家脑子里一定是要有的。
And I think in any place, when we go through development, it is important that you need to have a vision, you need to have the image of the place that you are living in.
也中国人一直非常自豪，认为自己的国家、自己的城市、自己的乡村啊，是这个世界上最像画一样美丽、最有诗意的一个地方。整个的历史我们都是这样描述的。
And the people in China are very proud of their own country, their own city, and their own village. Because in the past, from history, we always describe our city as a picturesque landscape and a poetic environment.
所以我们自然就会有一个结论啊，从自然出发，在我们的历史里头，乡村一直是比城市重要的。
And as a result, we draw a conclusion that we always start from the nature, and we always place importance on the village than the city.
当然，这个乡村和欧洲的那个理论里的乡村其实是不一样的。
Of course, the concept of village here is very different from the village in Europe.
因为它有普遍，比如说非常高的教育的质量，非常高的居住的水准，不贫穷。
And because generally speaking, people are highly educated, and we have good housing, and people are not poor.
即使在像如此非常深的这种山里，你去看这个村庄，你也不会发现有贫民窟的存在，都治理得非常好。
And even if you go to village like this that's deep in the mountain, you don't really see poor people there, and it has been managed very well.
就可以看到这是非常深的山里的村子，都非常的好。
And these are the villages that are deep in the mountains, but it's been managed very well.
所以我想说的就是，我们今天讨论城市和乡村的这种对立啊、冲突关系的时候，我们经常用的是一个没有经过深入思考的西方模式的理论来探讨这个地区的问题。其实这个地区的历史和文化和欧洲确实是有非常大的不同。
And what I'm trying to say is that when we talk about the conflicting ideas between city and village, we often adopt the Western's value to deal with the problem. But in actual fact, we have to take into consideration the history and the culture of the villages.
我们必须要意识到，我们这个地区曾经有过的文化，它的水准有多么的高，即使在今天，我们都很难再次达到的。
We have to realize that places like these achieve very high level of culture, and even as of today, we are not able to reach that level.
最简单，如果你站在另外一个立场上，你会看，比如说你比较这张图片当中一个浙江省的一个山庄里的村子，你可以看到它的这种艺术和美学的质量，那种生活的气氛。以我的观点看，那我肯定喜欢这里，胜于喜欢门前新加坡这个著名的窗口般的海港，因为这个没有美学质量，几乎没有，而这个是有的，这是不一样的。
Another viewpoint I have is that this picture is actually a picture of a village in Zhejiang, and you could see the quality of life there. You could see the beauty in living there. And I like these places more than places like Singapore, where we see the port. In my view, there's no quality.
当然，翻过来也说明，尤其是华人这个种族，他的生存的能力非常非常的强大。他可以从这样的一个环境里，他原来生活在这样一个环境里，完了之后可以建造这样一个城市，这个城市和他原来的文化几乎没有任何的关系。他也不觉得他的尊严受伤，他也不觉得他的自信心丧失。他用一个纯技术性的问题替代了所有的文化之后，他还能够再生存。 建立一个如此模范的、可以被管理的城市，在这时候你就不得不佩服整个这个文化它的这种生存的能力有多么的强大。
Amazing thing about the Chinese people is that they have a very strong way of surviving in the current environment. They could live in a city that is totally not related to their own culture, and yet they do not feel that their dignity or confidence is affected. So this ability of living in a model city with adopting the current technology and yet still respecting their own culture, it's very amazing for the Chinese people.
当然，你可以从这张图片上可以看到，其实有些东西是一直存在的。比如说新加坡在讨论的，和我们在中国乡村里看到一样，就是它一直有长期的有一个在高密度的情况下，如何有效的管理和生存的经验。
And from the picture, we could see that there are certain things that still exist, and this is what Singapore have been discussing, where in a high-density area, we still have village that could actually survive, and yet it's managed very well.
当然，我们也看到这个是和印度很不一样的情况。当我们看印度的孟买的贫民窟的时候，你可以不喜欢。 你可以不接受，但是你得承认，它充满了那种人性的真实的色彩，但是你看这个图片，中国的东西里面，你也可以看到那种有点小小混乱的人性的东西存在，但是它一直是有一个非常好的治理的传统。
And in this aspect, India is different. Take, for example, in Bombay, the place where the poor people live. You may not like it, but you realize that the people, the sense of the color of the people, that's what he said. The color of the people that actually exists in such place. And back to China. Looking at this picture, you see that there's still some chaos existing in the living environment, but on a whole, it's been governed very well.
这张图片在中国的乡村里几乎到处都可以看见，大量的存在。它有一个特点，就是可以很破、很残破， 甚至你觉得它有一点贫穷，但是非常的干净。
Such pictures of villages in China, you can actually see that everywhere. It may look rather run down, and it may look like a poor living environment, but it is very clean.
当然它一直在变化。
It's been changing.
你像这个是在村庄里新造的这种 meeting hall， 在1960年代、1970年代，这个是以前没有的。
So this is actually a picture in the 1960s and 1970s where you have new village that has a hall.
建造和结构的方式已经有很大的变化了。
The architecture method and the design, it's very different from the past.
这个是这个地区用1970年代开始用这个生土的技术做的新的农民公寓的这种试验。
This is an experiment that started in the 1970s, where a particular type of earth is used to build apartments for the farmers.
但是它原来这个文化的特点仍然被保持着。
Nevertheless, the characteristics of the culture has been preserved.
所以中国的情况其实是很不一样，就是它城市和乡村的关系是相互之间有深刻影响的关系。
So it is very different in China, where the relationship between the village and the cities are closely knitted.
所以我们看到这张图片，当然这是北京啊，就是我获普利策奖的时候，我站在旅馆窗户上，我拍的这张照片，就是。
So this is a picture of Beijing. It was taken from the hotel that I stayed.
第一个反应就是中国的文化完全失败了。
The first reaction is that the culture of China is a total failure.
第二个反应是资本主义的理想完全成功了。
And the second response is that the capitalism, it's a total success here.
第三个我们可以知道，明显看到像新加坡这样模范城市的作为示范的影响。
And third is that we could see the impact of Singapore as a model city on Beijing.
因为它一定有非常好的政府的管理才是这样。
Because we can achieve that as a result of our good government.
所以这两天我就觉得特别有趣，在新加坡讨论问题的时候，基本上三个概念：政府、社会、技术。
So in the last 2 days of discussion with various parties, I realized 3 things in Singapore. First is the government, second is the society, and third is the technology.
我们看这个特别有意思。你可以看到一个基本的特点，就是其实，在这样的住宅里，所有的人从原来的那个 community 里面被分裂出来，完了之后，它变成一个相对孤立的个体，被关在了这样的建筑中。
And we could see that the characteristics of living in apartments like that is that people are broken down from being part of a community into isolated individual, and they are all closed up in their own apartment.
因为像我们这些亚洲人，其实不太清楚，欧洲人在20世纪初发明这样的建筑类型的时候，他确实是受到了监狱建筑的重大的启发。
So we wasn't sure when the Asian people are building their city, were they influenced by the European way of architecture, where the building design was based on the concept of a jail.
你既然已经变成了一个囚犯，再放你出去，给你一点工作，给你点娱乐，你就很 happy 了。
So we all are like a prisoner, where we do some work and we have some entertainment and we're happy with it.
当然，我们也发现，整个的城市失去了个人的个性，那种每个个体的个性，城市的这种特点丧失，所以全世界的城市都出现这个倾向，通过设计一些非常奇形怪状的建筑，来强化建筑的城市的这个个性。
And we realized that the cities lose their own individual identity and they lose all the characteristics of a city. And that can be seen all around the world where some the buildings with odd design come out and they just do not have their own identity.
特别是在亚洲社会，我们特别热衷于谈论技术的发展，GDP 的增长，人们物质生活的改善。但是我有一点想说，这是要付出非常大的代价。同时，只是这方面的努力，我们永远不可能得到其他的文化圈的尊重。
And especially in Asia countries, we realize that the focus has been on the technology development, the increase in GDP, the improvement in the materialistic life. And to achieve that, we pay a big price. And as a result, we do not give due respect to our culture.
即使是我们把城市建设，比如说这是郑州啊，郑州的新城中心。中国有100个以上这样的城市在做这样的事情。
This is a picture of Zhengzhou city planning, and in China there are more than 100 cities that are going through this phase.
也像新加坡一样，现在要请很多著名的外国建筑师来做几个建筑。
And it's just like Singapore, where we have to invite some of the reputable architects from the world to build buildings.
别人最多会说你作为一个学生学得特别好而已。不会真的尊重你。
So the result is that as a student, you actually learn a lot of things, but you do not gain respect.
你像这样的一种地方，没有，这是反人性的。
Yeah, that's an example.
实际上，它背后是通过这样的发展来获得的。
So the current achievement that we get is a result of this ruined at the background.
这样的地方不需要专门去找，只要你走出去，每天你都可以随便在哪里都可以拍到这样的照片。
Such a ruined place, it's actually everywhere in China. You could actually take picture of that anywhere.
所以大家看一下，因为时间有限，我就不多讲。
Because of time constraint, I just show some these pictures.
杭州，我想多说一句，因为这个是中国城市在传统上的一个 model。
I would like to say something about Hangzhou. It is a model in China in terms of a tradition.
但是现在你可以看到它的那种变化，也跟新加坡非常的类似。
And now we can see that the changes that they've gone through, it's very similar to Singapore.
所以像中国这样的一个文化，要做出放弃或者彻底破坏自己文化的举动，应该是下了非常大的决心，受了非常大的刺激，才会这样做的。
And for China to actually destroy and to give up their culture, I think they must have made a strong determination to do that.
你可以看到传统的村庄的结构完全不存在了，一种新结构出现了。但是我不完全说这不是不好的，这是可能是一种新的城市的模式。农民把建筑全部造在马路的边上，中间还是田地。
And this is perhaps a new structure for our traditional village. I'm not saying that it's not good, but you could see from the pictures that the cities are actually built around the farmland.
那另外一方面，你可以说这些建筑非常的难看，因为都是农民自己发明的。但另外一方面，我觉得它还有另外的意味。就是这个社会至少还保有着一部分，就是说是非政府控制的，自己正在生长的这种力量非常幼稚，但是它这个力量还在。
And you might say that these buildings are very ugly because they are created by the farmers. But on the other hand, I think what they have preserved here is something that is not controlled by the government, even though you might say that it's quite childish.
所以我经常说一句话，就是建筑师，很多人认为它是一个技术的服务性的一个行业，我不赞同，因为在一个社会在发生剧烈变化的时期，其实建筑师要承担很大的责任。
And sometimes we say that architects are actually taking the responsibility of, they are actually using the technology and the services. I do not agree with that. I feel that the state of our society now, architect has to actually take up a big responsibility for that.
很抱歉，我能不能多说5分钟？因为我有一个翻译，他用去了我1半的时间。
I'm so sorry that I couldn't speak another 5 minutes more because I have an interpreter. She used up half of my time.
OK。这个大家看一下就好了。
So just show this to you.
这是我经常在想的问题，这些问题想不出一些答案，我是没有办法工作的。
These are some of the problems I keep thinking about, and if I can't get the answer, I really cannot work.
其实我的工作里很重要的一个就是怎么样能够来超越这个冲突，能够在我们过去的经验和今天的创造之间，能够产生一种跨越式的这样的一种联系。很多人以为好像你回到传统或者回到过去，好像是一件很容易的事情，只要你观念上选择了这个，你就可以做了。其实不然啊，我们可以看到，比如有人给我介绍说，你看这是新加坡的一个新的政府的大楼，它因为在这个传统保护区里，所以它不得不设计成这个样子。那这个意思就是说，它好像回到一点传统，但是其实大家也不喜欢，对吧？
Okay, my work is very important. I have to actually get over the conflicts between the past experience and innovative way of doing things, and to connect these two. So a lot of people think that going back to the past is easy, but in reality it's not so. Take example, the Singapore government may preserve some buildings, and we think that the traditions are preserved, but in reality it may not be so.
实际上，面向过去比面向未来要难得多。
In reality, I think to face the past is more difficult than to face the future.
在东亚地区，我们说面向未来的时候，一般的意思就是去抄袭比我们发展的快一点的地方。
And when we talk about planning for future, in actual fact, we are basically copying all those places where they have development that's faster than ours.
不知道怎么做。
And because in the past we do not know what to do.
我给大家看一下，这是我们做的工作。
So some of our works are shown in all
其
these
实这里
pictures.
面需要做大量的试验。
So we actually have to do a lot of experiments.
因为过去的这种手工工作的工艺和现代的快速的机械化的施工如何能够在一起工作，这需要做非常多的试验。
Because how do we make use of the past craftsmanship and to integrate with the fast technology and machinery? We need to do a lot of trial and error for that.
实际上我们也有一点小小的理想主义了。
Yeah, although we are a bit idealistic here.
对，我们现在工作的这个规模已经变得非常的大。
In the scale of our work is now very big, very large.
这是我最新马上要完成的。
This is my latest project. It's going to be completed soon.
你可以看到我关于这种传统的美学的讨论的一些努力。
You can see some of the traditional aesthetics in here.
大家看几张照片就可以结束了。
So I think the pictures will explain everything.
最后就是一个愿景，就是你对一个地区的未来什么更重要？我刚才听到一个新加坡的专家讨论，说把一个有红树林的海岛变成了一个大的新的城区，在讨论这个问题。其实这时候就是一个价值判断的问题。当你脑子里有这样一张图像的时候，你可能在准备摧毁那一片红树林的时候，你就很难下决心了，因为你知道什么更重要，什么不太重要，这是一个基本的价值判断问题。我最后一句话，我觉得我既然到了一趟新加坡，总要说一两句，可能对大家有帮助的话。我觉得新加坡接下来最重要的事情就是关于价值观的讨论，所有的未来应该如何，主要是关于价值观的讨论。这个地区是不是有一个清楚的价值观？至少到现在为止，我只知道它管理得很好，但是好像也不太清楚。谢谢大家。
Okay, so what I want. what I want to say is that it's important to have a vision for the future and to know what is important, what is not, and that hinge on the value judgment. And we heard about another expert talk about changing a mangrove place to a new city. So as a word for Singapore that might be useful, I think we know that Singapore it's being managed very well, but what is important is to set a very clear value system in our planning for future.
Hello? Yeah, it works, at least mine.
Of course, the technology works for you.
Thank God.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi.
No.
Oh, I see it's too low. Right. Sorry. Yes. Well, thank you very much. We've been treated to 4 very different presentations. We're not very good with technology. We've been treated to 4 very different approaches to the topic of technology and the cities. And I did want to put Professor Wang Shu last because I knew his views would be slightly contrary to what would have been presented. And it's good because it enriches the discussion. I would just begin with one question because, I know you are burning with questions and I don't want to take up more time. But I thought I'll just begin with one question for any member of the panel. You may choose to answer or pass it on. And that is that in different ways, we've talked of the use of technology in the city. And there is the sense that technology can help, and technology can help governments fulfill their functions, and can help people really access government much more. And it's going to be put more pressure on governments because it facilitates this engagement. Now, one of the issues would be this, that as you wire up a city, the question is, what happens, and I think Peter talked about this, when you wire up a city too much and you introduce too much technology, what happens when the technology becomes obsolete? What happens to poorer countries, less resource-rich countries that have to deal with the obsolescence of technology because it requires constant change, constant upgrading? Anyone on the panel?
Well, we keep doing it all the time, so therefore, well...
You have to speak into your mic.
Yeah.
Can you put up your...
Yeah. It was all right till I started speaking.
No, now it's working. You've got to bring it further up.
Yeah. Well, as long as yeah. Well, what we do is when we install any new infrastructure, particularly technological infrastructure, we look at how modular it is, how interoperable it is, how easily replaceable it is in parts without ensuring that our operations don't suffer. Second, by and large, we have found that the cost of technology per se, both hardware and software, have been going down rapidly. the cost of communication, has been going down rapidly. Therefore, replacing an existing infrastructure, technological infrastructure, with a more modern infrastructure has generally well, this is the first time it has happened to me in Singapore, I must say, this one. Found that replacing existing infrastructure, technological infrastructure, by new technological infrastructure is easier, less expensive, more useful, more comfortable, more functional, etc. Particularly if the planners make a good analysis of the business value, I don't know whether the functional value that such a replacement brings to the table. And as long as they have prepared those models, and as long as they are comfortable with the return on this new technology, I believe it shouldn't be an issue. Please.
Two points on this, and I, of course, agree with Mr. Murthy's comments on this. The first point is that obsolescence is not something to be feared. In most of the developing world, it's something to be planned for, right? Because in fact, any housing, any infrastructure that you build for the India of today, the Africa of today, will, unless things go horribly wrong, be completely inappropriate for the India or the Africa of 2050. Because those countries in 37 years will be wildly wealthier than they are today. And it is just unimaginable that whatever houses would be appropriate given the current level of wealth, whatever infrastructure that would be appropriate today will then be appropriate then. So thinking about obsolescence as being part of the plan, as part of the program, is critical. The second point that I want to make, rarely have countries been locked in by physical capital, by technologies. What they're locked in by is by human capital. The critical ingredient to allow the change is to have the type of skill, as I've argued already, entrepreneurship, that is flexible enough to do something different. The problem wasn't that Detroit had old factories. The problem is that it didn't have innovators, entrepreneurs, workers who are able to adapt. And that's the sort of critical ingredient for response.
No, I think my concern is that technology changes very rapidly. So, housing obsolescence, yes, but it takes many more years, 50 years. But in technology, 50 years is a very long time. You are right about the human capital. Are people upgrading themselves fast enough? But I mentioned this for poorer developing countries because it's a question of resources that must be invested in changing and upgrading. Peter had his hands up, and then I will go to the floor.
Well, I think I just want to add to this discussion on technology. Technology is really an enabler, and I think the key to me is making the right decision about which technology to adopt. And that is part of good governance. I remember, today we take our MRT for granted, and in fact we complain a lot when the MRT breaks down. But in fact, imagine the alternative which was explored many years ago, which was an all-bus system. Those of you who are old enough will remember the Hansen report, which postulated an all-bus system for Singapore. Now, if we if we had adopted that, and we continue to grow as we are growing today, I think we'd be having big problems with an all-bus system. So making the right decision is very critical. You can make a decision based on affordability, But later on, when you become wealthier, then you need to replace obsolete technology, obsolete housing, obsolete infrastructure. That's going to be a big drain on the treasury. So I think an ability to think about what kind of scenarios you're going to face in the future, what kind of technology is going to prove to be the more robust solution is extremely important.
I just want to add one point here. Unfortunately, most national governments, city governments, state governments world over use cash system of accounting. I'm almost sure that Singapore doesn't do. New Zealand was the first government in the world to go to accrual accounting, and I hope Singapore too is. The problem with cash accounting is that they don't even recognize depreciation. Therefore, as Professor Glaeser pointed out, if there is an obsolescence that is planned, if you depreciate it in a certain period, maybe 5 years or 10 years, then you would have accrued enough capital to provide a suitable replacement. So that is very important. Therefore, it's not just planning for technology, but even using the right kind of accounting is very important.
Thank you. Now I will invite questions from the floor because you've been waiting. Can we have the first question? Yes, a hand shot up there. What's this?
Worst sound team.
I know.
Hello. My name is Vijay Sirsai, Chairman and CEO of CPVT Energy, a demand-side management company in Singapore. This question is to Mr. Murthy, sir. One of the index to measure sustainability is the degree of energy optimization, that is the level of efficient use of the energy. I see significant opportunities to bring the demand-side resources in the energy planning equation by all the nations. May I seek your thoughts on this, please?
Well, actually, in India, almost every state government has mounted huge projects for smart grids. In fact, we ourselves have done it for the state of Karnataka and are doing for some other states. So there is a lot of emphasis on installing smart meters, in installing software and hardware necessary to manage the smart grid operation. I would say that there are too many state governments which have succeeded in doing it at this point in time, probably 3 or 4 out of about 27. So we still have a long way to go, but that work has already started, and they're spending billions of dollars in this.
Yes, over there. That's a gentleman.
Hi, my question is directed to Mr. Peter. It's concerning the point on managing information versus governance. As we know that some information, if released at untimely periods, will cause paranoia, especially when it comes over to the tipping point, where technology has already permeated the lifestyles of every day. So how are we going to look towards managing of information in this so-called technologically advanced stage?
My view is a bit different from your proposition that information, if out there too early, can create problems. I think we should treat information as something that is neutral. It is part of the, if you will, public infrastructure. And then you have to rely on market forces to decide how best to exploit that information, and also the good sense of the people to use that information in a sensible way. I think you can see around the world how data, information is being exploited largely for the good. But of course, there will be some people, some organizations which will abuse that kind of data, but on balance, I think it is beneficial. Urban planners, I think, want a lot of data. The more data they can get, the better their planning, the more accurate their planning, the better the state of their forecasting is going to be. If we withhold information, then they're just going to have to make bets, and if they get the bets wrong, well, lots of effort and lots of resources wasted. So I think on balance we should treat data as public infrastructure, and I think it's important that in Singapore we move in that direction.
Would Ed or Mr. Murthy want to talk about safeguards and how it is done, especially in iCloud data?
Well, one of the biggest challenges as we move forward is the expertise and competence to use big data. I believe that by 2020, this world would have 40 trillion gigabytes of data. That means each individual, it may not be each individual, but if you took an average, each individual will have as much as 4 trillion bytes of data. Let me give you one simple example. A couple of years ago, an American company did produce the genomic data for me. They were very kind to do that. And then they gave me a hard drive with 200 gigabytes of data. I mean, all this, that ACT, whatever, and all that. The point is this, our challenge is to take large amounts of data and convert it into information and use that information to get insight. So therefore, there is going to be a huge opportunity for the city governments to use these data and respond to the citizens very efficiently and very effectively. But then there are two issues here. One is privacy. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done on what kind of data is accessible by the various authorities without violating the privacy of the individual. And the second is terrorism, cyber terrorism. Therefore, once we tackle these two, I believe there will be a huge opportunity for us to use big data for making life of our citizens better.
Well, I can just, these concerns are real, but certainly when I think about the way that data has improved Boston, it seems to me very clear the upsides are considerably greater than downsides. Just to give you three quick examples. First of all, the City of Boston's Transit Authority decided to stream the arrival data of buses and trains. Just stream it, nothing, no precautions, no nothing, just stream the stuff, okay? Some clever fellow invented an app which now tells you when your bus is going to arrive. No cost to the city government, they just thought it would be useful to themselves, and so Bostonians now use this app, and I think there's a competitor one as well, no cost to city government, and find riding a bus a heck of a lot easier than they did before. If they put cautions on it, if they tried to manage it, it never would have happened. Second point, the information going the other way, there's another tool which is carried in your smartphone. You put the smartphone in the cup holder in your car, and it beams to the city government where there's a pothole. And then, there's also an app which enables you to email stuff in, but this one works even without you doing anything. So it enables the city to learn about the physical characteristics of the pothole without any particular action, any particular checks. And again, a sizable improvement. Last example, probably the one that received the most attention. We caught 2 terrorists who struck at our city two weeks ago. We caught them because of big data. We caught them because of the millions of pictures that were taken around the Boston Marathon and then put through various data sets and then connected to the two brothers. Right? This again is what data can do. We have much less to fear than we have to gain, but it is critical, and I just want to echo this, that we both take seriously the threat of cyber terrorism and also take these privacy concerns very seriously. I think that there are real concerns with privacy, but it is also true that they will be demagogued by special interests that do not want data to be used. In the US, this goes with the enemies, let's say, of school testing, have been trying to convince parents not to let their kids get tested. Often teachers' unions, which have strongly opposed the ability to sort of measure outcomes, have been behind this, pushing the anti-privacy, pushing the privacy concerns. Unless governments are out front in terms of taking care of privacy, particularly for children, this can destroy the entire school reform movement in the US, and that's something that I worry about greatly.
Yes. Again, yes.
Thank you. This working?
Yes.
Well, I would like to continue the debate or discussion on big data, and in the process, I suppose, direct the question to Professor Glaeser. Incidentally, I like your tagline, and I totally understand it about what looks green isn't necessarily so, and what does is green. I've read your book. So I agree with you about high-density living and that urban sprawl is bad. Perhaps I should just say here that in Singapore, we try to both look green and be green, but in the same places. But my concern is that with cities especially, and that's what we're talking about today, technology, innovation, and cities. You said many times in your book that the advantage of cities is that you have a very high density of people and therefore greater intensity of exchange of information. My concern is that this information is mainly from other humans, and ultimately it becomes short-circuited or incestuous, say. Let me just give a couple of examples. I totally agree with Professor Wang's point of view. So I think in the big picture, big data doesn't just look at information, innovation, technology. You have to learn from heritage, and that's how I agree with Professor Wang. Let me just give a quick example that he didn't have time to give. Lijiang, one of the UNESCO heritage sites, not in Zhejiang, in Yunnan, they had traditional village houses, and then they had high-density urban buildings. They had a huge earthquake, I think, about 20 years ago, and they found that the traditionally built structures did not collapse, whereas the modern buildings collapsed. And obviously, the people there had learned from tradition that these mud buildings were the way to go. So they started building in that way again. My concern is that in a city, you will not learn that you're not exposed to a lot of...
Gaiman, can you put give us your question.
Yeah, okay. Not sufficiently exposed to nature. And therefore, what you're learning is a very, very narrow, what you're seeing is a very narrow picture, and what you're learning, therefore, is equivalently narrow. Thank you.
Sure. I mean, look, cities, parks are a nice thing, too. I think it's It's a nice thing that New York City has Central Park. And I think there certainly are pleasant things in living around nature. I live surrounded by 1,000 acres of forest myself, although I can't tell you how much I'm dying to get away from that forest as soon as my youngest child is out of high school and get back surrounded by human beings rather than deer and lice. But you know, the really central point here is that you know, the greatest thing that we can give to people is choice, is freedom. Right? I'm not a lifestyle consultant, for goodness sakes. I'm not telling anyone where they should particularly live. I personally think there are wonderful things living surrounded by people in cities, but there are certainly people who want to live in rural areas, although it is important that we not mythologize them, right? Nowhere are the gaps in health between rural and urban living stronger than in China, where they are enormous in terms of the differences in health that come from people living in cities relative to living in urban areas. Nowhere are the difference in income more enormous, and in many of these areas, self-reported life satisfaction is not at all higher in these bucolic rural areas, they're called. In fact, these people typically report that they're miserable relative to people who are living in cities. So let's not mythologize the rural parts or even the traditional parts of developing countries. Moreover, when we actually typically look at natural disasters, most of the time modern engineering is far more effective than traditional poor areas. So certainly there are counterexamples, and there are areas of modern buildings when engineers have screwed up terribly. But the overall work, and the person who's done the most work on this is Matthew Kahn, the overall work tends to show that proper engineering is much better than you know, think about the millions who've died in Bangladesh and elsewhere in very traditional housing in response to various natural disasters. So I think the key point, though, is that, you know, choice is what we want. We want freedom. We want people to have different options. Singapore is limited in the choices it can give people because it's an island, because it's compact, and so living in the middle of you know, a truly wilderness area is not something that's possible. But even Singapore should aspire to be an archipelago of neighborhoods that allows people different options. And certainly in a large country, be it China or India and the United States, the glory is that you have different possibilities of living. The key is that you pay for the social costs of your choices. So it's great to live in a low-density suburb as long as you pay for the commuting, pay for the congestion and pollution you cause by your driving, right? And so that's at least the way, as an economist, I look at this.
Thank you. Gaiman, can...
Very quickly.
Yes.
My point is not lifestyle. My point is knowledge. And if you live in a city, you don't see the big picture. So it's not a case of living in a natural environment, which I know most people cannot afford. I'm just talking about the knowledge gap.
Thank you. I think there was, yes, there was someone behind that put the hand up first. Yes, the man with the pink shirt. Yeah, the gentleman in the pink shirt.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, sorry, you'll be next.
I'm Alfred Wu from SMU. This question is direct to Professor Wang. I will speak in Mandarin, Putonghua.
Can you also translate that and keep it brief, please?
Okay, I will keep it very brief. 王教授，你刚才讲的演讲，我讲我们很多人很有共鸣。您其实让我们思考了很多问题。但是我的问题是，您对城市未来的发展的观点是什么？So hearing from Prof Wang, we got a lot of inspiration and a lot of questions has been raised up in my mind. So my question to Prof Wang is that, what's his view about the future of the city?
Professor Wang?
I don't know if this works.
Do you mind speaking in English, please? Do you mind speaking in English?
I'll give it.
Yeah.
My English is really not bad, but I can try.
Oh, no, you're pretty good.
In fact, usually when we talk about the city now, usually we talk about the metropolis. It's a huge city, in fact. Because city all over the world, you have many different kinds of cities. Some cities is very small. Usually we talk about cities like the Singapore, like the Tokyo, New York, the Beijing, Tianjin, Shanghai, like this. For this big distance, everyone, I don't see their future. I don't know, really. because they go to the way they can't stop, and I don't see good future for them, in fact. But another side, when I talk about techniques development, for example, internet, I think internet it have another part. It's maybe many people they don't need citizen city again, because you can use the internet. You live maybe in the many different places. You can enjoy the relation to the groups, to the centers. You can share information. This means you have more choice. Another side, maybe it's mean it's a big part to destroy the big city structure now, I think. We just see what happened in the future. Yeah, so it means we don't need just to think about city is the only choice about future. Now, when we talk about the city, in fact, people, they have the meaning is the city is the only choice about a better life, about a more rich life. It was like this. I don't think so.
Well, this is a contrary view, but he does accept technology because internet will enable the individual to live outside of the city, in places of nature, etc. I think there was a gentleman here, yes. Oh.
Good morning, my name is Arjun Dhar. I'm a student from ACS Independent. My question is directed to Mr. Ho, Mr. Murthy, and Professor Glaeser. Mr. Ho and Professor Glaeser mentioned that there is immense pressure on governments to provide long-term, accessible, and innovative technology and systems to bring us to a better future. My question is, how can society complement the government in this endeavor?
Any takers first? How can society, that is the people, I guess, how can you use technology to complement the government?
I think we kind of touched on it in a response to an earlier question, because with all the data, assuming the data is out there, and it's not just the governments that own data, even private sector organizations like telcos own a lot of data. Assuming it's all out there, then how it's exploited is really up to the imagination of the individual, up to the imagination of the company, and they can do it for many purposes. And Professor Glaeser suggested some of the potential applications. For planners, of course, those in the business of urban planning, the more data you have, actually the more you can do with it, and the more accurate, I guess, your plans can be, and the more likely you are to avoid missing out on important gaps in information. So I think data is there, and it's really only imagination that limits you as to how you use the data.
It's a great question, and obviously I think governance is a collaborative effort. In many places, people get the government they deserve, in the sense that it's a constant effort to make sure that governments behave as well as they can. Some of the collaborations are clearly meant to be collaborative, right? So when Boston streams the data, it's actually hoping that someone is going to do it. In other cases, searching around in the data is a way to jostle a complacent or corrupt government into action. And that's certainly what we also hope big data will do, is that big data will challenge governments that are underperforming to do better. And I think that's what I think we all hope for, is a flowering of direct involvement by citizens working to try and improve things with the help of technology. That's the vision I got from Mr. Murthy's speech, and it's a vision I believe in as well.
Thank you. There was a question from the gentleman in front. Yeah.
Jan? Yes, Jan. I have a three-part little thing. I'll be quick. First is a comment. Belated happy birthday to the Internet, gifted by CERN to the world 2 days ago. I have a suggestion to Professor Chan. I think you should organize a debate between Professor Wang and Schmidt and Gerard from Google. I think the philosophical approach to technology, diametric approach, and I think it will be one good debate. So my question is very simple. I hear three possible utopia being proposed by three persons on the stage. The technologically innovative Singapore, relying on high computer power. The poetic city based on low tech from Professor Wang, and Professor almost prophetic introduction to many people may become aware of a little bit is Darwin. Despite no governance, despite no technology, almost low or no technology, is one of the most dynamic economic engine in the world. So my question basically is, on all probability and possibility, which is a better model for people to utilize, generally speaking, around the world, not per se one city, one region, but as a global community? Thank you.
What is the better model for the world? You have a technologically driven utopia, or one which really is low on technology, going back to nature? There must be something in between. Anyone caring to answer that?
I don't think there's one answer. I mean, I think it's a question of what's appropriate for individual areas. I didn't quite understand the Dharavi reference, but Dharavi is certainly no utopia. It's a symbol of the strength, the courage, the ingenuity of ordinary Indians, but it's an area that could use a whole lot of technology, especially in the form of clean water and better electricity and so forth. But that also requires good governance. I think part of the question is, what is it we want technology to achieve? And it's important that it is a limited tool for achieving that. It's a very powerful tool, but it's not everything. And I think that's the question when we think about, this question was brought up earlier of the sort of knowledge of nature. What is it that we want knowledge to actually bring us? What is it that we want it to do? And I think until we answer that question, we won't know exactly what utopia we're looking for.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think I said that we are trying to create a utopia built on high technology. What I said was that technology is undoubtedly going to be a servant of the vision you have. And whatever vision you have to decide then whether technology, if at all, is going to help you. Sometimes the pathways to reaching that utopia may not be all driven by technology, but you cannot ignore technology. Technology is a very critical part of what we can achieve. And you can imagine that without technology, well, you may be able to achieve something, but it will limit your options, and I think your level of achievement will be much lower. But it's a societal consensus that will decide what kind of utopia you want. If you are quite happy, living a very simple, straightforward life, then okay, then you don't need to use very much technology. But we'll still be very crowded. Economic levels of achievement and economic growth will be much lower. Does that mean we'll necessarily be happier? I don't know. But these are questions which society has to debate and come to some kind of consensus.
Now, we've reached 12, but I think, oh gosh, there are a couple of hands up. This is absolutely the last question. And since very few women have had the opportunity, I'll take a question. I hope you don't mind, from the lady at the back. Yes.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Yes,
short, direct, a question, not a statement.
Yes, right. I hear the obsolescence of technology, but I think one important issue that perhaps is the obsolescence of government, that we tend to perhaps think that government are there forever or forever. But I think one of the problems that a lot of cities that are not well managed face is actually bad government that are there forever. And also short term, because they are there for a very short time, they don't tend to plan for the long term. So then perhaps the question here is democracy a good political system? Or perhaps the governance system in China, how does that stand? How does that compare? Is that a better option? And then if both are not, then what is? Thank you.
Well, they have said you get the government you deserve. The panelists. This is a very large question, merits of democracy, what kinds of government work. And I think what you did say was good governance, good government really is what is needed, and is how to get to that good government. Now, would any of the other speakers like to add to that or answer that question?
I'll just say quickly that when you look at sort of the peaks of more dictatorial regimes, the peaks are very, very good. They're better than what democracy yields. But the troughs are awful, right? So I, for one, would rather put up with the mediocrity of Indian democracy than the peaks and troughs of China over the last 65 years, right? Because it takes a lot of mediocrity to make up for a great famine or large scale death. So I mean, this is something I think that is absolutely critical. Now, even within democracy, there are huge numbers of variations, right? There's a huge variation from the direct democracy of Athens to the highly representative, structured, more Republican settings. Cities, particularly when there's mobility between different locations, can afford more dictatorial leadership, can afford very strong leaders, and often cities need that to actually get things done. One last point that was central is that an abundance of space hides many sins. The failures of government, which aren't always there, become apparent because the problems of cities are so enormous, right? And that is one of the things that we're facing now that we see in cities. The upside is that urban residents, for millennia, have shown an ability to organize and to improve the quality of government, to effect change. This was true in Boston in 1775. It was true in Paris in 1789. This carries risks, of course. It's true in Tahrir Square 2 years ago. But there is a promise there that we can only hope will actually be rewarded.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I think it is now past the hour that we were to be gathered, and some of the speakers on the panel have to run off to the airport to catch their flight. So thank you very much. I thank the speakers for being here with us and for sharing their insights. Thank you. And we thank the audience for staying with us. There is coffee and tea outside, so please help yourselves. Thank you. Eh? Oh, sorry. Mr. Koo Ting Chai. Gee, I forgot. Mr. Koo Ting Chai, the CEO. Yes. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think Heng Chee has rounded it up very effectively, and I don't want to waste your time anymore other than to say that on behalf of Centre for Liveable Cities, we are really very proud and honored to have to be able to do this first collaborative project with the Lee Kuan Yew Centre for Innovative City, CIC, as opposed to CLC. Well, I have many friends coming up to ask me when CIC started, what's happened? Are you now kind of under Heng Chee? And I guess one has to clarify that the CIC has its strengths because it's part of the university. It's got tremendous resources from the MIT, Zhejiang University, and of course, tremendous chair in Professor Heng Chee. Whereas CLC, we are part of the government. We were actually started by the Ministry of National Development and Ministry of Environment and Water Resources. And our knowledge base really doesn't come from academia, although we work with academia. Our knowledge base comes from 21 stakeholder agencies, which are most of the government agencies and departments and staff boards that were involved in the fiscal transformation of Singapore. We believe that both the CLC and CIC, in fact, when Heng Chee first came back from the US, she called me up for lunch, and we agreed that there's a lot of things that we could do together and complement each other, and I'm glad that we've seen this as the first project. I think we have another project coming up in September. I don't know whether I can say what's all about. I think the project in September, the events in September, I think most of you will be very interested in also, is to commemorate the person who has been most responsible really for the physical transformation of Singapore in the last 50 years, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I think it is his 90th birthday. And on September 18th, we plan to have a one-day special session on the physical transformation of Singapore by the people who have been most closely associated to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I think Professor Chan and CIC and CLC will keep you posted on that event, and we hope you can join us then. So all I have to do now is to really thank the illustrious panel, so ably chaired by Professor Chan Heng Chee, and all of you for spending the whole morning with us. So thank you very much.